asterisk, asterisk. The whisper of a tear, can never fell, dot asterisk, asterisk. A coin, can never found its destiny. A gesture as small as paying for a coffee, as powerful as changing an entire life. Welcome back. Tell me what city you're watching from, and what time it is there. Now listen to this story. In the heart of Seville, where orange trees perfume the streets, and the echo of flamenco whispers on every corner, Clara wakes up every morning with the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. At 25, her hands already know the harshness of work, the fatigue that accumulates day after day serving coffee after coffee at La Esperanza, a small traditional café just steps from the Plaza de España. The worn tiles of the café reflect stories of generations. Clara cleans each table with the same dedication with which she cares for her grandmother Mercedes, an 83-year-old woman whose health fades like the steam from morning coffee. The pension isn't enough, medications cost more each month, and Clara smiles. She smiles when she charges tourists for their American coffee. She smiles when Don Paco, the café owner, reminds her that the rent for the small apartment where she lives with her grandmother is behind again. She smiles when she looks out the window and sees other girls her age with expensive purses, laughing without worries. But that smile, have you ever seen a smile that hurts? Clara had perfected it. It was a Tuesday in October, when Clara's world changed forever. The leaves were beginning to turn golden, and the Andalusian sun cast long shadows on the cobblestones. The café smelled of cinnamon and memories when he entered. Don Emilio Vázquez de Herrera, a 78-year-old man of medium height, with the worn elegance of someone who has lived intensely. His suit, though of good fabric, showed the small signs of time, a slightly loose button, polished but wrinkled shoes from years of walking. His gray eyes had that depth that only comes from prolonged loneliness. He sat at the corner table, the same one where Clara had seen so many customers cry over the years. He ordered black coffee, no sugar. His voice was soft, polite, but Clara perceived something more. A sadness she recognized immediately, because she carried it in her chest too. Don Emilio searched in his pockets. Once, twice, his slightly trembling hands patted his jacket with growing desperation. Clara watched from behind the bar. She saw how the old man's shoulders sank slightly. She saw the blush that rose to his cheeks. She saw the exact moment when his dignity began to crumble. "Excuse me, miss," murmured Don Emilio, timidly raising his hand. His voice broke slightly. "It seems that I left home without money. Could you save my coffee? I'll return tomorrow to pay for it." Clara felt something tighten in her chest. The coffee steamed on the table. €2. Only €2 separated that man from complete humiliation. She looked toward the cash register, where she barely had enough for the bus ride home. She looked toward Don Paco, who pretended not to listen but had his brow furrowed. "Don't worry," said Clara, approaching with a genuine smile for the first time in weeks. "The coffee is on the house." "No, I can't accept," began Don Emilio, but Clara had already made her decision. "Of course you can. It's just coffee." She sat across from him, something she never did during work hours. "Besides, I'm curious to know your story. Where are you from?" Don Emilio looked at her with a strangeness that soon transformed into gratitude. When was the last time someone had shown genuine interest in him, not as the rich Don Emilio Vázquez, but as the flesh and blood man behind the fortune? "I'm from right here, from Seville, though I've traveled a lot." His eyes lit up slightly. "And you, miss?" Clara Mendoza, and I'm also a purebred civilian." During the next hour, something magical happened at that corner table. Don Emilio spoke of his travels through Andalusia, of the farms he had known, of the beauty of olive groves at sunrise. Clara shared anecdotes from the café, of tourists who tried to dance flamenco after their third coffee, of afternoons when her grandmother told her stories of old Seville. Don Paco watched from the bar with growing nervousness. Customers were waiting. Tables needed attention, but Clara seemed in a bubble of suspended time. "You have something special, Clara," said Don Emilio finally, getting up to leave. "A light that isn't seen much in the world anymore. And you have fascinating stories, Don Emilio. I hope you come back soon." "I'll return." His eyes shone with unexpected determination. "I owe you a coffee, and the Vázquez always pay their debts." When Don Emilio left the café, Clara didn't know she had just passed the first test without knowing it. The letter said, "My dear Clara, if you're reading this, it means you've demonstrated having the heart I always knew you would have. I've spent my life observing people, and I learned that true goodness is hereditary, but not by blood but by example. For years I worked for the Morales family, but I also invested every peseta I could save, not in luxuries, but in small properties I knew would grow in value over time. I did it all thinking about the day when someone in our family would be worthy of continuing the tradition of generosity I hope to have initiated. The key that accompanies this letter opens a safety deposit box at the Bank of Andalusia. Inside you'll find not only money, but the deeds to 7 buildings in Seville's historic center that I bought over the years. But more importantly, you'll find letters from all the families I helped during my life and instructions for continuing to help them. Don't thank me, child. Thank life for giving you the opportunity to discover who you really are. Your great-grandmother who loves you from wherever she is. Elena. Clara read the letter 3 times before she could fully process it. When she looked up, Doña Esperanza was watching her with tear-filled eyes. Your great-grandmother was the most generous person I've known in my life. She never spoke about herself, but always knew of someone who needed help. On Sundays when she finished her work with us, she'd go distribute food to needy families. She used her own money, Clara, always her own money. Why did you wait so long to contact me? Because she had to earn the right by herself, not through inheritance. Elena was very specific about that. She said the money should only be delivered to someone who had already demonstrated knowing how to use it correctly. That night Clara went to the bank accompanied by Mercedes, Don Emilio, and Alejandro. The safety deposit box they opened was enormous, filled not only with documents and money, but with small treasures Elena had been saving for decades. There were photos of families Clara didn't recognize, but all with thank you letters addressed to Elena. There were receipts for medicines bought for strangers. There were deeds to small properties Elena had acquired not to live in, but to rent to needy families for symbolic prices. And there was something else, a diary. Clara opened the diary with reverence and began reading aloud. March 15, 1962. Today I helped the Rodriguez family pay rent. They have 3 small children and the father is sick. It's not charity, it's justice. We all deserve a chance. August 3, 1965. Elena Vasquez, no relation to Don Emilio, needed money for her son's operation. I gave her what I had saved for my new dress. Dresses wear out, but a saved life is forever. December 22, 1970. Today I bought the 3rd property. Not for me, but for the future. I know someday someone of my blood will continue what I've started. I feel it in my heart. Mercedes cried while listening. Don Emilio also had moist eyes. Alejandro, who had remained silent during the entire revelation, finally spoke. Clara, do you realize what this means? That you weren't chosen by chance for my uncle's test, that you carried generosity in your blood from before birth, that everything you've done was inevitable. Clara looked at the documents scattered on the table, at photos of unknown families her great-grandmother had helped, at the unexpected patrimony she had just inherited. No, she said finally, it wasn't inevitable. Generosity is a choice made every day, with every small gesture, with every opportunity life gives you to help or to ignore. She stood up and walked to the bank window, which faced the plaza where she had grown up playing. My great-grandmother chose to be generous. Don Emilio chose to put his patrimony at the service of others. I chose to pay for a stranger's coffee. And each of you chooses, every day, what kind of person you want to be. She turned toward the group. That's why we're going to do something different with this money. During the following weeks, Clara developed a plan that surprised even Don Emilio with its audacity and scope. Elena's new inheritance wouldn't be used to expand the Mercedes Mendoza Foundation. Instead, the Elena Network would be created, a completely different organization that would function almost invisibly. The Elena Network would identify people who, unknowingly, were performing exceptional acts of generosity in their communities. Not people seeking recognition or help, but people who, like Elena, gave silently from their own pockets to help others. A grandmother who buys medicines for a sick neighbor, Clara explained during the Elena Network's first organizational meeting. A mechanic who fixes cars free for families without resources. A baker who leaves forgotten bread where he knows homeless people will find it. Those people who do good without expecting anything in return, without anyone knowing. The methodology was elegant in its simplicity. Discreet researchers would identify these invisible angels, study their personal situations, and then they would receive anonymous help that would allow them to continue and expand their generous work. We won't tell them who's helping them, Clara explained. They'll just receive what they need to keep being who they are. The Elena Network's first beneficiary was Don Rafael, a 74-year-old retiree, who every day bought twice as many newspapers as he needed, just to give them free to people who couldn't afford to buy them. Despite his minimum pension, he invested almost half his income in this daily gesture. Don Rafael never knew that the scholarship for thinking retirees he began receiving monthly came from Clara. He only knew that now he could buy 3 times more newspapers and also have snacks at the bar where he had always wanted to be a paying customer, not just the gentleman who read leftover newspapers. The second beneficiary was Carmen, a night shift nurse who, at the end of each workday, stopped at the park where homeless people slept and gave them sandwiches she prepared at home before going to work. Carmen used a large part of her salary on these sandwiches, but had never told anyone. When Carmen began finding food bags appearing near the places where she used to leave her sandwiches, she didn't ask questions. She just smiled and knew that someone, somewhere, had noticed what she was doing and had decided to help her help. After 2 years, the Elena Network had identified and discreetly supported more than 200 people throughout Andalusia. Clara had developed a system of goodness detectives that functioned like an intelligence network dedicated exclusively to finding hidden acts of generosity. But it was during the 3rd year when Clara lived the experience that marked her most deeply. She received a report about a 23-year-old young woman named Patricia, who worked cleaning offices at night. Patricia had a younger sister with intellectual disabilities, and each month spent practically her entire salary on private therapies for the girl, because public ones had waiting lists of years. What was extraordinary wasn't just that Patricia sacrificed her own needs for her sister. When someone got sick, the rest took turns supplementing her work without the bosses finding out. Clara decided to meet Patricia personally before deciding how to help her. She posed as a new cleaning employee and worked for a week in the same office building. What she saw left her breathless. Patricia arrived each night with a genuine smile that illuminated even the grayest hallways of the building. She had a kind word for each of her coworkers. She shared her snack with whoever had forgotten theirs. And when she finished her shift, she stayed an extra half-hour organizing supplies so the next day's coworker would have everything easier. "I never charge for overtime," Patricia told Clara on the 3rd night, while they organized the cleaning supply warehouse together. "If I do the work a little better, the person who comes after can start more relaxed, and when you start relaxed, the whole day goes better." Clara felt something tighten in her chest. She was seeing a young version of herself, a young version of Elena, a young version of all the people who had chosen to make the world a better place regardless of how little they had to give. On Friday night, Clara revealed her real identity to Patricia. "I'm Clara Mendoza, from the Mercedes Mendoza Foundation. I've been observing your work, but not the cleaning work, the work of being an exceptional person." Patricia looked at her with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Have I done something wrong?" "Quite the opposite. You've done something so well that we want to help you so you can keep doing it." Clara told her about the Elena Network, about her great-grandmother, about the philosophy of helping those who help. Patricia listened in silence, with increasingly wide eyes. At the end, Clara asked her a question that would change the course of both their lives. "Would you like to work with us? Not as a beneficiary, but as a collaborator. We need someone who understands generosity from the bottom, someone who can identify people like you." Patricia accepted, but put one condition. "I can work with you, but only if my sister can come with me. She has a special ability to detect goodness in people. She sees things that normal adults don't see." And so the Elena Network incorporated its most unusual and effective team. Patricia, with her life experience and generous heart, and her sister Lucia, 16 years old, whose intellectual disability gave her extraordinary intuition for recognizing authentic goodness in people. 5 years after that first coffee paid at La Esperanza, Clara found herself directing a network of generosity that spanned not only Andalusia, but much of Spain. The Mercedes Mendoza Foundation continued operating its identification and testing programs for potential heirs. The Elena Network worked silently supporting anonymous heroes, and now something new had begun, the School of Goodness. The School of Goodness wasn't exactly a school. It was an experimental program designed for children and adolescents that had emerged from an observation Clara and Patricia shared. Authentic generosity is almost always learned in childhood, but is rarely taught intentionally. Children are naturally generous, Patricia had observed during one of their evaluation meetings, but the world teaches them to be selfish. What would happen if we designed experiences that strengthened their natural goodness instead of eroding it? The School of Goodness operated in 3 pilot schools, one in Seville, one in a rural mountain village, and one in a marginal neighborhood in Cádiz. The participating children didn't know they were in a special program. For them, they simply had more creative teachers who designed unusual school activities. Solidarity Mathematics Project. Children learned arithmetic by calculating how much food a family needed, how much it cost, and how to organize fundraising. Then they personally delivered the results of their math problems to real families. Empathetic Literature. They wrote stories from the perspective of people in difficult situations, and then researched real organizations that helped people in those situations. Sciences Applied to Well-Being. They built small inventions to improve the lives of elderly people or those with disabilities, using knowledge of physics, chemistry, and biology. What was extraordinary was that children didn't perceive these activities as moral lessons or charity. For them, they were interesting challenges, real problems to solve, opportunities to use their creativity and knowledge for something exciting. Mercedes, now 88 but with an increasingly lucid mind, had become the unofficial director of wisdom of the School of Goodness. She visited classes once a week to tell stories of old Seville, but interwove subtle teachings about values, about the importance of caring for others, about how small gestures can change the world. Children don't understand sermons, Mercedes told Clara after each visit, but they understand stories, and if the stories are good, they stay in the heart forever. Don Emilio, who had turned 82, had also become involved in the educational project, but from a different perspective. He took care of adolescents, especially those who already showed signs of cynicism or despair. At 15, he explained in his informal talks with groups of young people, "I believed the world was unfair, and it wasn't worth trying to change it. I spent the next 60 years discovering I was right about injustice, but had been completely wrong about whether it was worth trying to change something." His sessions with adolescents weren't lectures, but conversations. Don Emilio told them stories of his mistakes, of the opportunities to help he had wasted when he was young, of how he had discovered that genuine satisfaction only came from doing something for others. "One thing I've learned," he told them, "is that cynicism is easier than hope. Being cynical doesn't require effort. You just have to assume everything is wrong, and it doesn't matter what you do. But hope requires courage. It requires getting up every day and deciding to act as if your actions mattered." Some adolescents listened with skepticism, others with boredom, but there were always some whose eyes lit up with a light. Don Emilio immediately recognized the same light he had seen in Clara's eyes that first afternoon at the cafe. Patricia had become specialized in detecting that light, the spark of authentic goodness that some children and adolescents had naturally. Her work consisted of designing specific experiences to nurture that spark before the world extinguished it. Generous children, she had discovered, are often also the most sensitive. They feel more. They get hurt more easily. If they don't learn to protect their goodness, the world can turn them into bitter people. That's why she had developed what she called emotional resistance training, exercises that taught children how to keep their hearts open even when they experienced ingratitude, rejection, or misunderstandings for their attempts to help.
Knowing you did the right thing, she taught them, is a reward no one can take away from you, not even the person you helped. Lucia, Patricia's sister, had become the most sought-after goodness consultant in the project. Her intellectual disability, which had initially been perceived as a limitation, turned out to be an extraordinary advantage for identifying authenticity. Lucia couldn't understand complex concepts about economics, politics, or psychology, but she could look at a person for 30 seconds and say with absolute accuracy whether that person had good light or bad light. "Lucia is never wrong," Patricia said with pride mixed with amazement. "She can meet someone who says all the right words, who makes all the appropriate gestures, but if there's something false in their motivation, Lucia detects it immediately." It was Lucia who identified the first problematic candidate in the Foundation's history. A 46-year-old applicant had arrived, impeccably presented, with excellent references and a personal story apparently perfect for the testing program. He had cared for his mother for years, had worked as a volunteer in several organizations, had donated part of his savings to charitable causes. Don Emilio was impressed. Clara had some reservations, but couldn't articulate them clearly. Patricia thought the man was too perfect, but also couldn't specifically identify what bothered her. Then Lucia met the candidate. She needed only 10 minutes of simple conversation about neutral topics like weather and food. Afterward, she told Clara with that direct honesty that characterized all her observations, "That man doesn't want to help anyone. He wants people to think he helps, but inside he's empty." Clara decided to investigate more deeply. What she discovered left her frozen. The man had manipulated every generosity situation in his life to maximize his public image and social connections. He had cared for his mother, yes, but had hired publicists to ensure local newspapers wrote stories about his devotion. He had worked as a volunteer, but only in prestigious organizations where he could network with influential people. His donations were strategically calculated to generate tax benefits and public recognition. He had converted goodness into a commercial transaction, Clara explained to Don Emilio, after presenting her findings. Everything he did looked generous on the surface, but the real motivation was completely selfish. How did Lucia detect it so quickly? I don't know, but I think her disability allows her to see things that we, with all our mental complications, miss. She can sense the difference between someone who helps because it feels good and someone who helps because it looks good. This incident led Clara toward a discovery that revolutionized her understanding of authentic generosity. She began studying, with Patricia and Lucia's help, the difference between performative generosity and authentic generosity. Performative generosity looked perfect on the surface, but was motivated by external rewards, recognition, social status, personal profit, guilt alleviation, or simply the satisfaction of feeling morally superior. Authentic generosity, in contrast, emerged from a different, deeper place. It was motivated by genuine empathy, by recognition of the interconnection between all humans, by the simple understanding that helping others is part of being fully human. The difference, Clara began explaining in her talks, is that performative generosity answers the question, what can I get from this, while authentic generosity answers, how can I help, and nothing more. This distinction became the foundation of a new evaluation system for the Foundation. Instead of just evaluating actions, they began evaluating motivations. Instead of just looking at results, they began looking at intentions. Patricia developed techniques to detect these differences during apparently casual conversations. She learned to ask questions that revealed the true motivations behind generous behavior. Mercedes contributed with her experience of more than 80 years observing humans. I've seen people, she told Clara, who gave because it made them feel powerful, people who gave because it made them feel needed, people who gave because it made them feel guilty not to. And then I've seen people, few but special, who gave simply because it felt natural, like breathing. Don Emilio, remembering his own journey from loneliness toward authentic generosity, perfectly understood the distinction. For years, he confessed, my charitable activities were motivated mainly by guilt. I felt guilty for being rich while others were poor. I felt guilty for not using my money well. I felt guilty for being alone. I donated money to alleviate guilt, not to truly help. When did it change? When I met Clara. For the first time, I saw someone who helps simply because it's in her nature.
There was no guilt, no calculation, no performance. Just pure impulse toward helping someone who needed it. 8 years after the first coffee, Clara had created something that exceeded her wildest dreams. It wasn't just an organization. It was a social movement that was beginning to influence the culture of generosity in Spain. Schools were requesting pilot programs of empathetic education. Cities were implementing urban kindness initiatives, inspired by Clara's methodology. Media outlets were featuring stories about anonymous heroes, identified by the Elena Network. But more importantly, Clara had discovered that authentic generosity was contagious in a way she had never anticipated. When you observe authentic generosity, she began explaining in interviews, something activates in your own heart. It's as if you remember something you had forgotten, that being generous is natural, is part of what makes us human, is one of the most satisfying things we can do. The children in the School of Goodness were demonstrating this daily. They were not only becoming more generous, they were becoming happier, more confident, more creative. Their academic performance had improved across all subjects. When you teach a child that their actions can make a difference, Patricia had observed, they approach all other challenges in their life with more determination and optimism. Teachers in the pilot schools were reporting phenomena they had never seen before. Students were spontaneously organizing help for classmates with difficulties. Bullying had decreased dramatically. The school atmosphere had become more collaborative and supportive. Parents were noticing changes at home. Children were more considerate with grandparents, more helpful with household chores, more understanding when families faced financial difficulties. It's as if, one parent told Clara during a school visit, my son had discovered that being a good person is actually more interesting than being a selfish person. But perhaps most significant was that many of these children were inspiring their own parents toward more generous behavior. Clara received letters from families telling stories of how their children's involvement in the program had influenced their own decisions. Parents were volunteering more. They were donating more time and money to important causes. They were being more considerate toward neighbors and community members. One family wrote, our 9-year-old daughter came home from school and told us about a family in her class who was having difficulty paying rent. She asked if we could help. We hadn't thought about our neighbors' problems before, but seeing her genuine concern made us realize we can do more. Now we volunteer as a family at the local food bank every Saturday. Another letter said, my 12-year-old son organized a campaign to collect warm clothes for homeless people. Watching him work so dedicated to help others made me feel ashamed of how little I had done. I decided to use some of my vacation days to volunteer at the shelter too. I discovered that helping others is more fulfilling than anything I had done for myself. Clara began to realize they weren't just teaching children to be generous. They were creating generational change, where parents inspired by their children were becoming more generous themselves, which created households where generosity was normalized and celebrated. Don Emilio, observing these phenomena, made an observation that profoundly impacted Clara. You've discovered, he told her, the secret I spent my entire life searching for. Not just how to identify generous people, but how to create them. This comment led Clara toward her most ambitious project yet, what she called Generous Seville, a citywide initiative designed to make generosity a defining characteristic of their community. Working with local government, businesses, schools, and religious organizations, Clara proposed creating a comprehensive system that would recognize, support, and encourage generous behavior at all levels of society. The plan included minors' goodness spots in all public spaces where people could leave donations of food, clothing, or other necessities for those who needed them. A volunteer exchange system, where residents could offer their time and skills to help with specific projects in their neighborhoods. Generosity scholarships for students who demonstrated not just academic excellence but also commitment to helping others. Community heroes recognition events, where anonymous helpful actions would be celebrated publicly. Generosity business partnership programs, where companies could contribute not just money but also employee time and expertise to community projects. The most innovative idea was the chain of goodness.
a system where each act of generosity would be documented and linked to the next act, creating a visible network of kindness that spanned the entire city.
Imagine, Clara explained in her presentation to the city council, that every time someone does something generous for someone else, it's recorded somehow, not necessarily with names. It can be anonymous. But imagine you can physically see how an act of kindness in one neighborhood leads to another act in a different neighborhood, and how that leads to another, and so on. Using simple technology, residents would report acts of generosity they witnessed or received through an app, a website, or even physical boxes located throughout the city. These reports would be visible on a public map, creating a real-time visualization of generosity flowing throughout Seville. The effect was magical. Within months, citizens began actively looking for opportunities to add their own links to the chain. They weren't competing for recognition. Most reports were anonymous. They were competing to contribute. Clara received emails like, "I saw on the map that someone in my neighborhood helped an elderly person with groceries. It made me think about elderly people in my building who might need help. Now I'm helping 2 neighbors with shopping every week." Or, "The chain showed that someone paid for a stranger's coffee at a cafe near my office. I decided to do the same thing. I also started carrying extra sandwiches to give to homeless people I see during my lunch walk." The map became a tourist attraction. Visitors to Seville would check the chain of goodness to see what generous things were happening in different neighborhoods, and sometimes would add their own contributions during their visit. Local businesses began incorporating acts of generosity into their operations, not for marketing, but because they wanted to be part of something beautiful that was happening in their city. A bakery started leaving fresh bread forgotten on park benches where they knew homeless people sheltered. A taxi company established free rides for elderly people going to medical appointments. Hardware stores offered free repairs for anyone over 70 who needed help with household problems. But perhaps the most beautiful results were those that occurred between strangers. People began recognizing others from their neighborhoods because they had seen their contributions in the chain. Conversations started between people who had never spoken before. Communities began organizing together to address larger problems. When a family in Triana lost their home to fire, hundreds of neighbors who had never met them contributed not just money and supplies, but also time and skills to help them rebuild. They not only reconstructed the house, they created an extended support family that continued helping long after the emergency had passed. Mercedes, now 89 and requiring substantial physical assistance, was delighted by her city's transformation. "Clara," she told her granddaughter during one of their evening conversations, "remember when I told you that your great-grandmother's ring was waiting for the right moment to fulfill its purpose?" "Yes, granddaughter. Well, now I understand that we were all waiting. I was waiting to see your purpose fulfilled. You were waiting to discover what that purpose was. Don Emilio was waiting to find someone worthy of carrying his legacy. Your great-grandmother Elena was waiting from beyond death for her investment of generosity to multiply." Mercedes paused, looking out the window where she could see Seville's lights sparkling in the darkness. And the entire city of Seville was waiting for someone to remind them of what they already knew but had forgotten, that helping each other isn't an obligation imposed from outside, but a natural expression of who we are when we're at our best. Clara felt tears beginning to form. In recent years she had been so focused on organizing, managing, and expanding all her projects that sometimes she had forgotten to simply feel gratitude for all that had happened. "Grandmother, sometimes it feels like it's all growing too fast, too big. Sometimes I worry I'm losing track of the original purpose." Mercedes reached for Clara's hand with her own, much more fragile but still warm and strong. "What was the original purpose, child? Help people. Still doing that?" "Yes, still doing it in a way that respects dignity and promotes authenticity." "I think so. Then it's not too big. It's exactly the size it needs to be." That night Clara walked through Seville's streets, observing the city that had become so different since that afternoon when she first paid for a stranger's coffee. She passed by La Esperanza, now both cafe and community center. Through the windows she could see Don Paco conducting English classes for elderly residents, using methods that were half lesson, half conversation, whole celebration. She walked by the building where Patricia used to work as a cleaner and now operated a headquarters for the Elena network. She could see lights still on in several offices, where volunteers were working to identify the next invisible angels who deserved secret support. She passed the park where so many reports from the chain of goodness originated. Even at that late hour, she could see small signs of generosity. A coat deliberately left on a bench with a note that said "for someone who needs warmth." A bag of fruit left near where she knew homeless people often slept. Finally she walked to the place where everything had started. The bank where her great-grandmother Elena had kept her safety deposit box for decades, waiting for the right moment to transfer her generosity legacy. Standing in front of that building, Clara felt a presence she couldn't explain rationally, but that felt absolutely real. It was as if Elena, Mercedes, Don Emilio, Patricia, Lucia,
All the people who had helped create this movement of generosity were standing beside her, all of them together, all proud of what they had built together. But more than that, she felt an even larger presence, the presence of all the unknown people throughout Seville, who, inspired by different initiatives and programs, were choosing each day to be generous, to help, to care, to make others' lives a little better. That, Clara realized, was her true inheritance. Not money, not buildings, not recognition, but the multiplication of goodness, the growth of generosity, the transformation of a community toward something beautiful. She thought about all those people she would never meet, people whose generous acts had been inspired by programs she had helped create, but whose actions were entirely their own choice, entirely their own merit. That multiplication of goodness, that expanding network of generosity, that had grown far beyond anything she could control or organize, that was her great-grandmother's real gift, was Don Emilio's true legacy, was her own authentic contribution to the world. Standing there in that plaza, Clara finally understood that her genuine purpose was not to be the hero of generosity, but to be a catalyst, not to be the center of attention, but to be the seed that planted other seeds, which planted still other seeds in a never-ending cycle of growth and multiplication. She took out her phone and made a report for the chain of goodness. Anonymous person in Plaza del Salvador felt profound gratitude for all generous people in Seville, inspired to continue working to make our world kinder. No specific action to report, just commitment to continue. Within minutes her report was followed by others, saw previous report and felt the same gratitude, decided to wake up early tomorrow to make breakfast for the homeless shelter. Previous reports remind me I haven't called my elderly neighbor this week. Will visit tomorrow with homemade soup. All these reports are making me feel hopeful. Will donate blood this week. Clara smiled. The chain continued. Night and day, action inspiring action, generosity creating more generosity, exactly as she had dreamed, more beautiful than she had ever imagined possible. Have you ever lived through, or known someone who has gone through something similar? Have you had to choose between economic security and the values that really matter? I'd love for you to tell me about your experience in the comments. Every story of generosity, every gesture of kindness, every decision to put love before money, contributes to creating a better world. If this story touched your heart, if you identified with Clara, Don Emilio, or even Mercedes, please give this video a like. Share it with someone you think needs to hear this message. And if you want to keep hearing stories that celebrate the best of humanity, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Remember, in a world that sometimes seems obsessed only with money and superficial success, every act of authentic generosity is a silent revolution. Every person who chooses to be kind without expecting reward is changing the world, one coffee at a time. See you in the next story. And remember, you too can be the Don Emilio or Clara in someone else's life. Thanks for listening to the end. She only didn't know that man had spent the last 3 years touring Seville, visiting establishments, observing people, looking for something he couldn't define until that moment. Don Paco approached as soon as the door closed. Clara, what the hell was that? You've been working here for 2 years and I've never seen you sit with a customer. He was an elderly gentleman, Paco. He just needed a little company. Elderly gentlemen need many things, but we need the tables to be attended. Don't do it again. Clara nodded, but something had changed inside her. For the first time in a long while, she had felt that her work had a purpose beyond counted euros. That night, while preparing her grandmother Mercedes' pills, she told her about her encounter. Grandmother, today I met a very interesting gentleman. He reminded me of you when you tell me stories of old Seville. The grandmother, from her chair by the window that faced the small interior courtyard, smiled with that wisdom that comes with years. Angels sometimes come dressed as ordinary people, Clara. Maybe that gentleman needed to meet you as much as you needed to meet him. Don't be superstitious, grandmother. It's not superstition, child. It's experience. Clara woke up the next day with a strange feeling of expectation. While preparing breakfast for her grandmother and getting ready for work, she couldn't get Don Emilio's gray eyes out of her head. There was something in them that had touched her deeply. The café dawned with its usual routine, the aroma of freshly ground coffee mixed with the smell of toast with tomato. The first customers arrived seeking their dose of caffeine before facing the day. Clara served with mechanical efficiency, but her eyes constantly turned toward the door. He didn't come. On the 3rd day, Clara began to worry. What if something had happened to him? What if she had misinterpreted their encounter? What if he had simply decided not to return? It was Don Paco who broke her thoughts. Clara, there's someone here who wants to see you. She turned around, and there was Don Emilio, but this time he didn't come alone. He was accompanied by an elegant middle-aged woman, dressed in a suit, and carrying a leather briefcase that Clara mentally calculated cost more than her salary for 3 months. Good morning, Clara. I present Mrs. Rosario Mendoza, my lawyer. Clara's heart raced. Lawyer, had she done something wrong? Was it about the coffee she had treated? Relax, child.
smiled the lawyer, as if she had read her thoughts. You haven't done anything wrong. Quite the opposite. Don Emilio sat at the same corner table and gestured for Clara to approach. Clara, I want to make you a very special proposal, but first, let me tell you a little about myself. During the next 20 minutes, Clara's life changed forever. Don Emilio Vázquez de Herrera wasn't just an elderly man with interesting stories. He was the owner of 3 farms in the province of Seville, of an apartment complex in the historic center of the city, and of shares in half a dozen Andalusian companies. He was, in short, a millionaire. But money, Clara, he explained with deep sadness in his eyes, doesn't give you family. It doesn't give you purpose. And when you reach my age without children, without a wife, without someone who really knows you, you realize you've built an empty empire. Clara listened in silence, feeling how each word resonated in a deep place in her soul. I've spent the last 3 years looking for someone worthy of inheriting everything I've built. Not someone with my surname, because I have no direct family. Someone with my values. The lawyer intervened with a professional but kind voice. Don Emilio has decided to subject different candidates to a series of tests over 6 months. Tests that evaluate character, generosity, honesty, and moral strength. And you, Clara, continued Don Emilio, already passed the first test without knowing it. When you paid for my coffee, when you sat with me, when you treated me with dignity without knowing who I was, you demonstrated exactly what I've been looking for. Clara felt the ground move under her feet. Are you telling me that, the other day, I left home with money, Clara, but I wanted to see how you would react to a stranger's need? Have you ever felt completely overwhelmed by news? Clara couldn't process what she was hearing. She looked toward the bar, where Don Paco pretended to clean cups while obviously trying to listen to the conversation. She looked toward the street, where normal life in Seville continued oblivious to the revolution taking place in her world. I don't understand, she finally murmured. What kind of tests? Real tests, Clara. Situations where you'll have to make decisions that will reveal your true character. Some will be easy, others will push you to the limit of your strength.
But if you pass them all, if she passed them all, completed the lawyer, she'll inherit Don Emilio's entire estate. Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes. She thought of her grandmother, of the medications she couldn't buy, of the nights she stayed awake calculating cents. She thought of the dreams she had abandoned to care for Mercedes. She thought of the university she could never finish. Why me? She asked in a broken voice. Because when you saw me in difficulty, you didn't hesitate for a second to help me. Because you sat with me without asking for anything in return. Because in your eyes I saw the same loneliness that's in mine, but I also saw hope. Don Emilio leaned forward. Because I believe you understand that the true value of life isn't in what we accumulate but in what we give. Clara looked at the lawyer, seeking confirmation that this wasn't a dream or a cruel joke. It's completely real, Clara. Don Emilio has been preparing this process for months. You're the first candidate who has passed the initial test. Are there other candidates? There may be. That depends on whether you accept to participate. Clara felt her world split in two. On one side, the known security of her current life, the job at the cafe, caring for her grandmother, the predictable though difficult routine. On the other side, an opportunity that seemed straight out of a fairy tale, but which implied risks she couldn't even imagine. How much time do I have to decide? Until tomorrow, replied Don Emilio. If you accept, we'll begin immediately. If you don't accept, I'll respect your decision, and you'll never see me again. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She stayed sitting by her grandmother's bed, watching her breathe slowly, thinking about everything she had heard. Mercedes woke up around 3 a.m, and found Clara with red eyes from so much thinking. What's wrong with you, child? Clara told her everything, every detail, every word, every sensation. Her grandmother listened in silence, with that infinite patience that only women who have seen much of the world have. And what do you feel in your heart? Mercedes finally asked. Fear, grandmother. A lot of fear. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? What if this ruins our life as we know it? Clara, my dear child. The grandmother took her hands with her wrinkled but firm fingers. All my life I've seen opportunities pass by this window like birds. Some you let go because they're not for you. Others you let go out of fear. And some, her eyes filled with tears, some you let pass and regret for the rest of your life. Do you think I should do it? I think that gentleman saw in you the same thing I see every day, a golden heart with diamond value. And I think you have the right to shine, Clara. You have the right to more than this life of constant sacrifice. The next morning arrived with unusual clarity. Clara woke up knowing exactly what she was going to do. She dressed with special care, said goodbye to her grandmother with a long kiss, and headed to the cafe with determination walking beside her. Don Emilio was waiting for her at the corner table, drinking the same coffee that had changed everything. Good morning, Clara. Have you made a decision? Clara sat across from him and looked directly into his eyes. I accept. Are you sure? Once we begin,
There will be no turning back until the 6 months are over. I'm sure. Don Emilio smiled for the first time since Clara had known him. Not the polite smile he had shown before, but a genuine smile that completely lit up his face. Then welcome, Clara, to the rest of your life. The first test came that same afternoon. Don Emilio summoned her to an address in Triana, the neighborhood across the Guadalquivir where houses huddle like kept secrets. When Clara arrived, she found a scene that left her breathless. A gypsy family lived in a small house, whose roof had partially collapsed from recent rains. An elderly man, his wife and 3 small children had lost practically all their belongings. They lived in one room that still stood, sharing 2 blankets and eating what neighbors could give them. This is the Vargas family, explained Don Emilio. Your first test consists of helping them, but with one condition. You can only use your own resources. Not my money, not my contacts, only what you can get with your own means. Clara felt how the magnitude of the challenge settled in her stomach like a cold stone. Her salary barely covered her and her grandmother's needs. She had no savings. She had no influential connections. She only had her hands, her heart, and a determination that was beginning to grow like wild grass. How much time do I have? 2 weeks. Clara spent those 2 weeks discovering facets of herself she didn't know existed. She organized a collection among the cafe's regular customers, explaining the situation without mentioning anything about Don Emilio or the tests.
She spoke with the priest at Santa Ana Church to get used clothing. She convinced 3 downtown restaurants to donate food they were going to throw away at the end of the day. But the real test came when she realized all that wasn't enough. The family needed at least 1,000 euros to temporarily repair the roof. Clara had managed to raise 300. There were 10 days left until the deadline, and she couldn't see how to get the rest. It was her grandmother who gave her the answer, though in a way Clara didn't expect. Child, do you remember your great-grandmother's ring? Clara felt her heart stop. Her great-grandmother's ring was the only valuable thing they had left, a gold piece with a small diamond that had passed from mother to daughter for 4 generations. It was their security, their plan B for an extreme medical emergency. Grandmother, no, yes, Clara, it's time, but it's our last resort if something happens to you. Mercedes took her granddaughter's hands and squeezed them tightly. Clara, listen to me well. That ring has been waiting its whole life for the right moment to fulfill its purpose, and I think that moment is now, not for us, but for that family that needs it more. Clara cried that night like she hadn't cried in years. She cried for the ring she was going to sell. She cried for the pressure of the tests. She cried for the responsibility she felt toward the Vargas family. But above all, she cried for the terrible beauty of discovering that true love sometimes hurts more than hate. The next day she sold the ring to a downtown jeweler, got the 700 euros she needed, and was able to complete the provisional repair of the Vargas roof. When Don Emilio came to verify the test results, he found Clara at the Triana house helping Mrs. Vargas clean the newly repaired rooms. The children ran around, screaming with joy at having a dry home again. How did you manage it? Asked Don Emilio. Clara didn't respond immediately. She stayed watching the children play, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and loss she didn't know how to describe. I sold something that was very important to me. Do you regret it? Clara thought about her great-grandmother's ring. She thought about the generations of women who had worn it as a symbol of resistance and hope. She thought about her grandmother, who had given it up without hesitation to help strangers. No, she said finally, and was surprised to realize it was completely true. I don't regret it. You've passed the first test, Clara, but I'm afraid the following ones will be much more difficult. How do you face the tests that life puts in front of you? Have you had to give up something important to help others? The second test came in a completely unexpected way. One Monday morning, while Clara served breakfast to regular customers, a man of about 40 entered the cafe, well-dressed, with that air of superiority that expensive cars and fat bank accounts give. He sat at a center table and snapped his fingers to get Clara's attention. Hey, waitress. Clara approached with her professional smile intact. Good morning, what can I offer you? A cortado. And make it well done, not like the garbage they serve in other places. While Clara prepared the coffee, she couldn't shake the feeling that she knew that man from somewhere. His face seemed familiar, but she couldn't place him. The man drank his cortado in silence, constantly checking his cell phone, completely ignoring the world around him. When he finished, he called Clara with another finger snap. The check, 2 euros please. The man took out a 50-euro bill and put it on the table. I don't have change. Clara looked at the bill. In the cash register she had exactly 48 euros in small bills and coins. If she gave complete change, she'd be left without money for the rest of the day. I'll have to go to the bank to change the bill, Clara explained. Can you wait a few minutes? I can't wait for anything. Either give me change now, or I'm leaving without paying. Clara felt the situation becoming absurd. The man clearly had money,
but was creating an unnecessary problem. Sir, I understand your hurry, but I need to make change. It's just a moment. You know what? Forget it. The man got up abruptly. I'm leaving without paying. If you can't provide basic service like having change, you don't deserve my money. And he headed toward the door. Clara felt all her alarms going off. Something about that situation smelled wrong. The man looked rich, but was doing everything possible to avoid paying €2. It was as if he was playing a role. Wait, shouted Clara, running after him. Take the change from my personal pocket. Don't leave without paying. The man stopped dead and turned around slowly. In his eyes was something Clara couldn't immediately interpret. Are you sure you want to do that? Of course.
It's just money. Clara took 48 euros from her personal pocket, practically everything she had for her daily expenses, and handed it to the stranger. The man took the money, stared at her for a few seconds that seemed eternal, and then smiled in a way that made Clara feel uncomfortable. Very good. You've passed the test. What test? I'm Alejandro Vázquez, Don Emilio's nephew, and this has been your second evaluation. Clara felt the ground open up beneath her feet. Don Emilio's nephew, the person who had legal right to the inheritance she was trying to win? I didn't know Don Emilio had family, distant family, but family nonetheless, and I've been watching you, Clara. My uncle may be playing the generous benefactor, but the reality is that money is mine by right. Then why are you participating in the tests? Alejandro stepped closer, and Clara could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something that smelled like contempt. Because my uncle is a stubborn man who has convinced himself he can choose his heir based on cheap sentimentality. But I know the law, and I know people like you. People like me, poor people who get excited by crumbs from the rich, people who believe a charitable gesture makes them worthy of a fortune they haven't earned. Clara felt anger rising from somewhere deep in her stomach. All her life she had endured derogatory comments about her social class, about her work, about her economic situation. But something had changed in recent weeks. She was no longer willing to swallow humiliation in silence. Mr. Alejandro, she said in a calm but firm voice, I don't know what kind of person you think I am, but you're completely wrong. I'm not here for anyone's crumbs. I'm here because your uncle saw something in me that apparently you can't see. And what did he see? A desperate waitress who's willing to do anything to get out of her miserable life. Clara felt tears of frustration welling up in her eyes, but didn't let them fall. He saw someone who pays for a stranger's coffee without expecting anything in return. He saw someone who sells her great-grandmother's ring to help a family she didn't know. He saw someone who gives money from her pocket so a rude customer doesn't leave without paying. He saw an idiot. The verbal slap hit Clara like a physical punch, but instead of crushing her, it made her stand taller. If being an idiot means having compassion, then yes, I'm an idiot. And I'm proud of it. Alejandro looked at her for a few more seconds, and then did something completely unexpected. He burst out laughing. You know what, Clara? I like you. You're more interesting than I expected. He headed toward the door, but before leaving he turned around once more. But that doesn't mean I'm going to let you keep my uncle's inheritance. I'm going to defeat you, Clara, and when I do, I hope you remember this moment. Clara stood in the middle of the cafe, trembling slightly, feeling how all the customers were looking at her with curiosity. Don Paco approached with a worried expression. Are you okay? Who was that guy? Problems, Paco. Problems the size of a fortune. That night, Clara called Don Emilio outside of scheduled hours for the first time. Why didn't you tell me you had a nephew? Because I wanted to see how you'd react when you met him. Is this also a test? Everything is a test, Clara. Every day, every decision, every person you meet. Life itself is a test. Your nephew told me he's going to fight for the inheritance. That's his right. Does that mean I'm competing against him? Don Emilio remained silent for a few seconds that felt like hours. Clara, I'm going to tell you something about Alejandro. He's an intelligent man, educated, successful in business, but he's never visited me without needing something. He's never asked me how I am without having a hidden agenda. He's never looked at me like you looked at me that first day in the cafe. But he's your family. Family isn't defined only by blood, Clara. It's defined by love, respect, real presence in others' lives. Alejandro may have my surname, but you have my heart. Clara felt something warm spread through her chest, but at the same time a new worry began to grow. What's going to happen if he decides to take this to court? Then we'll have a legal battle, and you'll have to prove that you don't need my money to be the person you are. I don't understand. You will, Clara. When the time comes, you'll understand. The tests continued during the following weeks with growing intensity. The third test took Clara to a village in the Cádiz Mountains, where she had to mediate a conflict between two families who had gone generations without speaking due to a land dispute. Clara spent entire days sitting with the elders of both families,
listening to stories of grievances that went back to their great-grandparents, trying to find common ground from which to build reconciliation.
The cuarto test was more subtle but equally challenging. Don Emilio put her in charge of one of his farms for 2 weeks, with responsibility for making all decisions related to workers, crops, and investments. Clara discovered that managing rural property required not only technical knowledge she didn't have, but also a deep understanding of human dynamics that she had developed at the café. The 5th test almost broke her. Don Emilio took her to a nursing home on the outskirts of Seville, and assigned her the task of spending a full week caring for the most difficult residents. Clara found herself feeding people who couldn't care for themselves, cleaning elderly people who had completely lost their physical dignity, listening to the same stories repeated over and over by minds that navigated between present and past without a compass. But it was in that nursing home where Clara had a revelation that changed her perspective on the entire process. She was helping an elderly woman named Carmen get dressed when the woman, who suffered from advanced dementia, grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "Is it you, Maria?" she asked with eyes full of hope. Clara knew Carmen was confusing her with her daughter, who had died years ago. The nurses had explained that all she could do was play along to avoid further traumatizing the elderly woman. "Yes, it's me, Mom. Maria, I thought you were never coming back." "I always come, Mom. I'm always here." Carmen began to cry, and Clara hugged her without really knowing why. In that moment, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and medicines, holding a woman who confused her with her dead daughter, Clara understood something fundamental about Don Emilio's inheritance. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about the capacity to love unconditionally, to care without expecting reward, to be present in others' suffering without fleeing. It was about understanding that life was full of Carmens, Don Emilios, Vargas families who needed more than money. They needed someone who saw them as complete human beings. When Clara finished her week at the nursing home, she felt changed in a way she couldn't explain. She wasn't the same person who had served that first coffee to Don Emilio. Something deep had been transformed inside her. But the tests weren't over yet. The 6th test came in a way that left her completely unprepared. One December morning, when the first cold weather was beginning to reach Seville, Clara received an emergency call from the hospital. Her grandmother Mercedes had fainted at home and been taken by ambulance. Clara ran to the hospital with her heart in her throat, thinking about everything that could happen, everything she could lose. When she reached the room, she found her grandmother conscious but very weak, connected to various monitors that made constant reassuring sounds. "How are you, grandmother?" "Better, child." It was just a scare, but the doctor who appeared a few minutes later had an expression that didn't reassure Clara at all. "Miss Mendoza, we need to talk." In the hospital hallway, under fluorescent lights that made everything look harsher and more dramatic, the doctor explained the situation. Mercedes had a severe kidney infection that required immediate treatment. Without aggressive medical intervention, her life expectancy was a few weeks. With proper treatment, she could live several more years with good quality of life. "What's the problem then?" asked Clara. "The treatment isn't completely covered by Social Security. She'll need special medications and care that cost approximately 5,000 euros. Clara felt her stomach churn. 5,000 euros. An amount that would have been impossible months ago, but now, with Don Emilio's inheritance practically in her hands, was completely feasible. But that was exactly the problem. That afternoon, Clara called Don Emilio and explained the situation. "I need to ask you a favor. Tell me, Clara. I need 5,000 euros for my grandmother's treatment. I'll pay back every last cent when I receive the inheritance, I promise." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched until it became uncomfortable. "Clara," Don Emilio finally said, "I can't do that." "Why not?" "It's to save my grandmother's life. Because it's part of the test." Clara felt the world wobble around her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you must find a way to get that money by your own means, without my help. That's your 6th test, Clara, and the most important of all. But it's my grandmother's life." "I know, and precisely because of that it's so important." Clara hung up the phone with hands trembling from rage and desperation. How could Don Emilio be so cruel? How could he turn Mercedes' illness into a test? During the next 3 days, Clara moved like a woman possessed through all of Seville. She spoke with banks to request loans she couldn't guarantee. She contacted charitable organizations that waited lists of months. She organized raffles and collections that barely gathered by a few hundred euros. Time was running out, and Mercedes got worse each day. It was Don Paco who suggested the option Clara had been avoiding considering. "Clara, there's another way."
"What?"
"Alejandro Vasquez has been asking about you. He came to the cafe yesterday."
"What did he want? To make you an offer?"
Clara felt all the hair on her body stand up. "What kind of offer?" "He said if you renounce your uncle's inheritance, he'll pay all your grandmother's medical expenses. Not just now, but everything she needs for the rest of her life." Clara sat heavily in a chair at the empty cafe. It was late, they had already closed, and the streetlights created strange shadows on the walls. And what do you think, Paco? I think your grandmother is the most important thing you have in the world, and I think all this inheritance business has been nice. But the reality is you have a real responsibility to a real person who needs you. Clara knew Paco was right. All the money in the world wasn't worth Mercedes' life. All of Don Emilio's tests, all the philosophy about the authentic value of people, all of that was secondary compared to saving the woman who had raised her. That night she called Alejandro. I accept your offer. Are you sure? Completely. Very well. Tomorrow I'll take care of all your grandmother's treatment expenses. In exchange you'll sign a document formally and definitively renouncing any right to my uncle's inheritance. Agreed. One more thing, Clara. What? I deeply respect what you're doing. I didn't expect you to choose your family over money. It's not a choice, Mr. Alejandro, it's an obligation. Clara spent the night awake beside her grandmother's hospital bed. Mercedes slept deeply, with that irregular breathing of seriously ill people. Clara took her hand and whispered everything that had happened during those months. Grandmother, I'm going to renounce the inheritance. I know you'd tell me not to do it, to find another way. But there is no other way, and you're the most important thing in the world to me. Mercedes slightly opened her eyes, and looked at Clara with that intermittent lucidity she had in her most clear moments. Clara, child. What, grandmother? That gentleman, Don Emilio. Do you love him? The question took Clara completely by surprise. How do you mean if I love him? As a person. Do you love him as a person? Clara thought about Don Emilio, about his gray eyes full of loneliness, about the afternoons they had spent talking about Seville and its traditions, about the way he had lit up when she showed genuine interest in his stories. Yes, grandmother, I love him. Then don't disappoint him. I don't understand. But Mercedes had fallen asleep again, leaving Clara with a confusion that added to all her anguish. The next morning, Clara headed to the law office where Alejandro was waiting with the renunciation documents. She wore her best dress, the only one she had for special occasions, as if she were going to a funeral. In a way she was. The funeral of her dreams. The conference room was impressive, with a polished mahogany table, and windows facing the Giralda. Alejandro was there, elegant as always, with a smile that tried to be kind but couldn't completely hide his satisfaction. Good morning, Clara. Are you ready? Ready. Perfect. Here's the document. Basically it establishes that you freely and voluntarily renounce any right, present or future, to the estate of my uncle Emilio Vázquez de Herrera. In exchange, I commit to covering all your grandmother's medical expenses for the rest of her life. Clara read the document slowly. It was surprisingly simple for something that was going to change her destiny forever. Any questions? Just one. Does your uncle know what I'm doing? I'll tell him after you sign. Clara took the pen. She felt it heavy in her hand, as if it were made of lead instead of metal. She thought about all the dreams she had built in recent months. She thought about the farms she had begun to imagine as hers. She thought about the university she could finally afford. She thought about the economic security she would have given Mercedes. But above all, she thought about Mercedes, sleeping in the hospital, depending on her making the right decision. She signed. Done, said Alejandro, putting the document in his briefcase. I'll take care of speaking with the hospital immediately. Your grandmother will receive the best available treatment. Clara nodded, and headed toward the door, but before opening it, she turned around. Mr. Alejandro, can I ask you a question? Sure. Why did you do this? You would have gotten the inheritance anyway just by waiting. Alejandro leaned back in his chair and looked at her thoughtfully. Do you want me to be completely honest? Yes. At first I did it because I didn't want a stranger to keep my family's money. But afterward, after seeing you during these months, after seeing the tests you passed, after seeing how you really are, I did it because I realized someone like you should never have to choose between love and economic security. Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes. Thank you. No, Clara. Thank you for showing me something I had forgotten about, the real value of people. Clara left the building and walked slowly toward the hospital. The streets of Seville seemed different, as if she were seeing them through a new filter. She was no longer the potential heir to a fortune. She was simply Clara Mendoza again, waitress Mercedes' granddaughter, normal person with normal problems. But strangely, she didn't feel defeated. She felt peaceful. At the hospital, she found a scene she didn't expect. Don Emilio was sitting next to Mercedes' bed, holding her hand while she slept. Don Emilio, what are you doing here? I came to meet the woman who raised the most extraordinary person I've known in years. Do you already know what I did? I know. Don Emilio stood up and approached Clara. And I want you to know something. You've passed the most important test of all. I don't understand. I failed. I renounced everything. Do you really think you failed? Clara looked toward her grandmother, who breathed peacefully connected to the machines that kept her stable. I put my family love above your test. I chose a person over an abstract fortune. Exactly. Don Emilio smiled. Clara, all my life I've seen people willing to betray their loved ones for money. I've seen children who let their parents die to inherit sooner. I've seen people abandon their principles for an economic opportunity. But you renounced a fortune to save the person you love. But I already signed the renunciation. Alejandro has legal right to your inheritance. Did Alejandro tell you I knew about his offer? No. Did he tell you I suggested it? Clara felt the ground move beneath her feet for the umpteenth time in these months. What are you saying? I'm saying Alejandro and I planned this situation together. I needed to know if you were capable of truly loving, or if all your goodness was just a performance to get money. Clara sat in the chair Don Emilio had vacated, feeling her legs fail her. Has it all been a lie? On the contrary, Clara. Everything has been absolutely real. Your generosity, your sacrifice, your love for Mercedes, all of that is real. The inheritance is also real, and it's still yours. But I signed the renunciation. Don Emilio smiled and took some documents from his jacket. You signed a renunciation that has no legal validity, because the estate you were renouncing had already been transferred to your name this morning, before you met with Alejandro. Clara felt the world spinning around her. She looked at the documents Don Emilio extended to her. They were property deeds, bank transfers, investment titles, all in her name. It can't be. Clara Mendoza, you are officially one of the richest women in Andalusia. And most importantly, you've truly earned it. Clara began to cry. She cried with relief for her grandmother. She cried with gratitude toward Don Emilio. She cried with happiness for all the possibilities that opened before her. But above all she cried because she finally understood that she had found something more valuable than all the money in the world. She had found a family. Mercedes woke up at that moment, as if she had been waiting for the perfect moment. Are you done playing rich people, children? Clara and Don Emilio looked at each other and burst out laughing. Grandmother, did you know, child, I've been 83 years in this world. What do you think? 6 months later, Clara was standing on the balcony of her new home, a beautiful villa in Santa Cruz, Seville's historic quarter. From there she could see the Giralda illuminated against the night sky. Downstairs, Mercedes watched television in a living room that had more medical conveniences than she had ever dreamed of. The Café La Esperanza had been renovated and converted into a community center that offered free breakfast for people in need, literacy classes for elderly adults, and Andalusian tradition workshops for young people. Don Paco managed it with renewed joy that rejuvenated his spirit. Clara had decided to study social work to better manage the community aid projects she had established with her inheritance. 3 days a week she still worked at the café, not because she needed it economically, but because she had rediscovered that serving others gave her a sense of purpose that money couldn't buy. Don Emilio dined with her, and Mercedes twice a week. He had become the grandfather Clara never had, and the son he never had fathered. Alejandro, far from holding a grudge, had become actively involved to Clara's social projects, discovering a philanthropic vocation he didn't know he possessed. But the most important thing of all was something Clara had understood that first night after signing the renunciation. She hadn't inherited Don Emilio's fortune because she was a good person. She had become a better person through the process of earning his inheritance. Clara took her phone and dialed the number she had called hundreds of times in recent months. Don Emilio, it's Clara. Clara, daughter, how are you? Fine. I wanted to ask you something. Tell me, are there more people like me? People who could benefit from a process like the one I lived through? Don Emilio smiled on the other end of the phone. Why do you ask? Because I think I've discovered what my true purpose is. It wasn't inheriting your fortune, Don Emilio. It was learning to use it. And so began the second part of Clara's story. 3 years later, the Mercedes Mendoza Foundation had identified and supported 47 low-income people who had demonstrated exceptional values of generosity and humanity. Each had gone through a process similar to Clara's, facing tests designed specifically for their circumstances, discovering strengths they didn't know they had. Clara had learned that there's nothing more powerful than giving people the opportunity to discover their own greatness. Mercedes, at 86, chaired the foundation's monthly meetings from her motorized wheelchair, with a lucidity and energy that amazed everyone. Money, she always said, is like soil. It only serves if you plant something in it. Don Emilio had finally found the purpose he had been seeking in his final years. It wasn't just bequeathing his fortune, it was multiplying it through people who understood that true wealth is found in the capacity to transform the world around you. One April morning, during Seville's fair, Clara received a letter from a young waitress in Barcelona who had heard about the foundation. The letter said, Mrs. Clara, I work in a small bar in the Gracia neighborhood and care for my sick grandfather. Yesterday, I paid for an elderly gentleman's breakfast who had forgotten his wallet at home. I don't know if this means anything, but they told me you might understand. Clara smiled as she read the letter for the third time. She approached the phone and dialed Don Emilio's number. Emilio, I think we have our next candidate. Barcelona, Barcelona. Perfect. It was time to expand our operations. And the cycle continued. Because Clara had learned the most important lesson of her entire life. When you give without expectations, the universe conspires to give you more than you ever dreamed. When you choose love over personal benefit, you don't lose anything. You gain everything. Life, she discovered, is generous with the generous. But there was something more Clara was about to discover. Something that would change not only her perspective on generosity, but on the true meaning of legacy. It was a November afternoon when she received an unexpected visit from Doña Esperanza Morales, an elegant 70-year-old lady who arrived at the foundation accompanied by 2 lawyers and a notary. Miss Mendoza, I come to speak with you about your great-grandmother. Clara felt a strange chill run down her spine. Her great-grandmother had died when she was barely 5 years old, and the memories she had of her were fragmented, almost ethereal. My great-grandmother. I don't understand. Your great-grandmother, Elena Mendoza, worked for my family for more than 40 years. She was more than an employee. She was part of our family. When she died, she left very specific instructions about something that should be delivered to her female descendant when she turned 25, and demonstrated having the same generous heart she had. Clara felt the air escape from her lungs. What kind of instructions? Doña Esperanza smiled with a warmth that immediately reminded Clara of Mercedes. Elena knew things we didn't understand then. She knew about true goodness, about how to recognize it, about how to nurture it. She predicted that her descendant would be someone special, someone who would understand that true wealth isn't counted in euros. One of the lawyers stepped forward with a sealed envelope that seemed to have been waiting for decades. Your great-grandmother entrusted us to monitor the Mendoza family for generations. When we learned through local media about your foundation, about your story with Don Emilio, we knew the time had come. Clara took the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written in elegant, ancient handwriting that she immediately recognized. It was the same handwriting she had seen in some old letters. Mercedes kept in a shoebox. Inside the envelope were 2 things, a handwritten letter, and a small ornate key.